Blog Talk Radio.
Context of
Hi,
white
this
supremacy.
is Peggy McIntosh.
Yes, ma'am. We are live and ready to roll here. Context of white supremacy. Gus T Renegade.Is here for another program to share constructive information on racism, white supremacy, what it is, how it works, to hopefully help replace white supremacy with justice soon. Justice, are you there?
Yep.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. Can you speak up, please, so we can hear you? That way everybody can hear your questions and things.
Okay.
There we go. Excellent. Our guest for today's program, she is a professor at Wellesley College.
No, I'm Associate Director of the Wellesley Centers for Women at Wellesley College.
Okay. My apologies.
I'm not a professor there.
Oh, okay. Thank you for correcting. She also has written a lot of reports on racism, white supremacy. I think the one that she's most known for is White Privilege, Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack. I think that's the one most people know that she authored, but she's written a lot of other reports as well. She's also done work with the White Privilege Conference. Pretty certain she knows Dr. Eddie Moore Jr. Very well. I'm pretty certain she's done work there. She can share what she's done in relation to the conference as well. With us on the program, Dr. Margaret McIntosh. I think she said Peggy McIntosh, but yeah, she can let you know. Dr. McIntosh, yes. Are you here?
Mm-hmm.
Outstanding.
Peggy McIntosh is the name I usually go by.
Could you say it again, please?
Peggy McIntosh is the name I go by.
Okay. Peggy.
And Peggy is a nickname for Margaret.
Okie dokie. Could you share with our listeners anything you think would be helpful so they get a better understanding of who you are and why you do this work?
Well, I came to understand white skin privilege, which is unearned advantage that I have by being born white, through watching men in seminars I was leading for men and women show that they had male privilege with regard to the whole system of knowledge. And it didn't have to do with whether they were nice men. They, in fact, were our allies and our friends in these seminars I was leading on how new books and scholarship about women could potentially change college courses in all the disciplines. And these men came to Wellesley to be with the women in the seminars. They came from all over New York, New England, Connecticut. So did we, the women in the seminars. We were all college teachers or scholars. And yet when it came to one really sticky question, which was raised by the women each year in the spring of the year, the men and the women came to dislike each other. And it's as though we had a silent fight going on. And I was very mystified and upset that we weren't getting along, because these guys were very nice, as I say, and they were also our allies. These were all white men. But the reason I came to see privilege systems is that I didn't want to end the series. It had been going on for 3 years. It was always oversubscribed. People wanted to be in this series and come to Wellesley once a month for a 5-hour meeting with a meal and talk about new scholarship on women. And I didn't want to end the thing, but I thought I'd been doing something wrong. So I decided, well, I could report to the foundation that had funded us that I had goofed as a facilitator, but if they would give me another several $100,000 to continue this seminar, I would mend my ways as a facilitator and the men and the women wouldn't fight. Well, then I was trying to get together my confession about what I'd done wrong. And I looked through my notes, and I found I hadn't done anything wrong. But as a natural thing, Gus, every spring, once the group had gotten comfortable with each other to talk honestly, the women had raised a question that just blew us out of the water. And the question was, okay, how can we get this new scholarship on women into the first-year courses that students take as soon as they get to college? And the men, every single man for 3 years running, they were all different groups of men, they all said, we can't get any of this in at the beginning. The syllabus is full. The reading list is full. It's just full. And I'm saying under my breath, full of what? But I am too polite to say it. But I had taken notes about when that argument started each year, and I found the men said this kind of thing. One man said, well, when you're trying to lay the foundation blocks for knowledge in those first courses that kids take in college, you can't put in soft stuff. So all women now become soft, and all the scholarship on women becomes soft. This doesn't really fit the description of your mother, my mother. But that's what he felt, that women are soft and you've got to start with hard knowledge. Then another year, a guy said, see, the students are choosing their discipline that first year. They're choosing their discipline. And if you're trying to get them to think in a disciplined way, you can't put in extras. So his mother has become extra. All his sisters, his cousins, his aunts, his female children, his girlfriend, his wife, they've all become extra. And I found this oppressive, but they were very nice men. So I thought I had to choose. Are these nice guys or are they oppressive? And it was for me either or. I didn't see any other way of judging this. The thing is, these men were not only nice, they were very brave. It took quite a lot of guts to come to Wellesley once a month and join with feminist women in discussing how bad the curriculum was with regard to females and how it needed to be changed. They took a lot of flack on their own campuses for being with us in these seminars and at a feminist institution, which was the Wellesley Centers for Women. So I went back and forth in my mind. Are they nice or are they oppressive? And suddenly I was reminded that 6 years earlier, in 1980, I had read 2 essays by black women based in the Boston area, which had in effect said white women are oppressive to work with. And they just said it as a kind of, it was an assumption about all white women, no exceptions, that we were oppressive to work with. And I remembered reading those essays and being amazed that they, naive, isn't it, that they found us oppressive to work with. And I remember that I had 2 strong responses, and by now this was 6 years later that I was starting to write the paper that has become so well known, or the work that has become so well known. But back there in 1980, my first response to reading those things written by black women had been, I don't see how they can say that about us. I think we're nice. And the second thing is outright racist, but this is where I was back then. I thought, I especially think we're nice if we work with them. First of all, that's not very nice. But second, it's filled with the white superiority that I was taught and the sense that whites should be in control. And this is the really outrageous thing, that it's filled with the sense that I felt I deserved thanks for working with people I had been taught to look down on. And at first I was mortified by remembering those responses I had had to black women's writing that white women were oppressive to work with. And then my next thought was, I hope my attitudes didn't show. And for a couple of years I hoped that I had been, and I'm not the only white who would do this, I hoped that I had been so nice, quote unquote, that my racist attitudes hadn't shown. And after a couple of years I said, yeah, they definitely showed. My black colleagues in those seminars knew perfectly well how condescending I was, how racist my attitudes were, but they worked with me anyway, not because I was different from all other whites, but because at least they could see I was making an effort. So then I decided a couple of things. Niceness has nothing to do with it. And second, people who express something like male privilege in the curriculum are doing so because they were taught it. They didn't invent it. They were born into a system, and in this case it's the knowledge system, and the knowledge system said to them, men have knowledge, men make more knowledge, men publish knowledge, men profess knowledge, men run all the presses, men run all the major universities of the United States. And they learned this. They learned that knowledge itself is male, and they had come to believe it. And moreover, they had been taught men are knowers. They know more than women do. And it wasn't their fault. And then I just looked sideways, remembering that black women had said we were oppressive to work with, and thought, yeah, look what, of course we must be, because look what we learned. I was the wrong sex to get into the knowledge system the way the men could, but I was the right color, because I was taught whites have knowledge, whites make more knowledge, whites publish knowledge. About people of all colors, whites publish their knowledge, or rather their perspective, and whites run the presses, and whites become the professors, and whites run, at least when I was coming through college 50 years ago, ran all the main knowledge-building institutions called universities, except for the traditionally black colleges. Whites ran so-called higher education. And so I was a very good student of what I had learned, which was whites, well, first of all, knowledge is white. And also, whites are knowers. And that's the first half of my story. I can tell you the second half because those two things only got me as far as seeing that whiteness had dominated the knowledge system. But then I went on to the other systems of the world, but I can take a break here if you want me to, without telling the second half of how I came to see the whole picture beyond the knowledge system being in the control of whites.
Very interesting. I know we have a lot of questions we want to get to today, so I definitely want to get the second half, but I want to get to some of the questions and then make sure we pick that up so you can share that with our listeners, because I'm sure they would be interested as well.
Yeah, the second half goes from just the knowledge, whiteness in the knowledge system to whiteness in all the social systems. But I'll wait now because I've told you a lot so far.
Okay. Well, you've already pretty much told us you are a white woman. Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay. This program, The Context of White Supremacy, I have concluded that we are in a global system of racism, white supremacy. And the definition that I use for white supremacy is a global system of people who classify themselves as white and are dedicated to abusing and or subjugating everyone in the known universe whom they classify as not white. Do you believe that such a system exists, and do you feel that that definition is accurate to describe what's happening on the planet?
I believe there's a global system of white privilege. I think you make it too much of a conscious thing when you say white supremacy, which is usually a bunch of embedded assumptions about who should be in charge, doesn't come so consciously as the word dedicated implies. It's necessary to distinguish between living in a system that gives you power and approving of that system. One of the toughest things to crack here is that most whites think they don't approve of a system of white supremacy. So your word dedicated is a very word about conscious effort. And I don't.
Well, that's one thing I want to clarify. I want to clarify one thing. I never said conscious and or unconscious, but I do think for this system to be running for as long as it's been going, you have got to have people who are dedicated to making sure that this does not fall apart from neglect or from non-white people working against it. So for it to continue, you've got to have the white people who participate in it have got to be dedicated to making sure that this continues. So I want to ask, do you believe that we are in a system of white supremacy?
The white supremacy is in the underlying assumption. So in South Africa, you did have a whole legal system dedicated to keeping white supremacy in place. Then after the abolition of apartheid, you still have white supremacy, but it's now in the unconscious minds of whites. And people are in the position I told you is so difficult to describe, of thinking that they disapprove of the old South Africa. But at the same time, the assumptions laid down in whites that they ought to be in charge are still operative. So now you've got the unconscious service to white supremacy, whereas under apartheid you had a legal system of white supremacy.
I still don't feel like I've got an answer whether you think there is a system of white supremacy. I'm not really talking about whether it's conscious among white people or unconscious.
It does. I need to make that distinction.
Right, that's fine, but I still haven't really gotten an answer, or at least I don't
I'm not going to
feel
give you an answer if you make me choose between conscious and unconscious, because
I'm not talking about conscious or unconscious. I'm just talking about if you believe there is a global system of white supremacy.
I'm not going to answer that if it includes the idea that that means all whites are dedicated to abusing people of color.
Right. Those are two separate questions. If you don't feel that that definition is accurate, that's fine. You can give me your definition. But if you feel there's a system of white supremacy, that would be one. Then you can define it if you think my definition is inaccurate. So the first question is, do you believe that there is a system of white supremacy?
No, not on your terms. I believe there's a worldwide system of white privilege.
Okay. So we have, this is important, you are the first white person who has ever come on this program and said they do not believe there's a system of white supremacy, and you are the first white person who has come on this program and said they don't think that definition is correct. And I've had way more white people on this show than non-white people, and you are the first one. So that is interesting. Could you share, you said you believe there's a system of white privilege. Can you tell us the definition that you're using for the system of white privilege?
Okay. The system of white privilege is a system of unearned advantage that is not only in the individual psyches of people, but in the structures of the society. and through colonialization and militarism as well, the system of white privilege got spread around the world to allow white people more than we have earned in the way of money, power, respect. So, for example, when my anthropologist daughter does work in Kenya, she may be the only white person for miles around, but she's given white privilege because of the legacy of unearned advantage for whites in post-colonial Kenya. Even the name, Kenya gets pronounced in an anglicized way, but that's the least of it. So through the residues of colonialization and genocide of, let's say, American Indians, you have, even in the Arctic and the Antarctic and all around the globe, a system in which whites get more than we deserve. And do we know it? Now here's where the matter of defining what you mean by conscious and unconscious comes into play. Most people born white on the face of the earth don't understand that we have white privilege. Therefore, most people on the face of the earth who are born white take advantage of whatever they can in order to live a life they have been told is a good life. And the knowledge system throughout the world has been influenced by white Western knowledge making, even if it's in China, even if it's in Indonesia, even if it's in Latin America. It's white Western, north of the equator, influence on what's considered to be knowledge. So, in addition to that, there is a wave of awareness that white privilege exists and should be resisted, first named and resisted. And I'm hoping, though of course I won't get to see it, but that I'm hoping that to create a more just society, whites will A, realize that we're white, B, realize that we're in a system that isn't fair, and C, use our power to weaken the hold of white supremacy on the institutions of our culture and of our country. So I believe that the Iraq War has strong elements of race in it. I believe that World War II and the Vietnam War had strong elements of race. These were wars fought by white people or by American people who were governed by whites. They were fought on lands of people of color. So that's the racial element in United States wars, and it's very strong. Does the United States know that it engages in wars that are racial in their basis, at least in part? No. What I'm saying.
Okay. Hold on one second.
Isn't something anybody could say.
Right. I want to give my co-host here, I want to give her opportunity to ask some questions because she's been hanging out for a minute and hadn't got to really talk. Justice, are you there?
What is her name?
Justice.
Justice?
Justice with a J. Justice, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, speak up. Remember, speak up. Feel free. Go ahead if you want to ask Dr. McIntosh. Go ahead and ask her some questions.
Okay. I got lots of questions, so I'll just go one part at a time.
Okay.
How do you practice white supremacy every day?
Did you say, how do I practice it?
Yes, how do you
How do I practice it each day?
Yes.
Well, it's given to me. I don't have to practice. That's one thing about white privilege. I was born into it. So do you mean how do I experience it every day?
I didn't say white privilege. I said white supremacy. May you please use the term white supremacy?
Oh, okay. Well, I said by the definition I was given by Gus, I will not use that word to describe what I know about. I will use the word privilege.
Okay. And then, when you were talking about, knowledge earlier, what is male knowledge?
Men are taught they know more than women. And I believed it when they taught it to me. So male knowledge is like having all the history books written by men.
Okay.
All the books you read in English class. How old are you?
I am 10.
Okay. Let's say if all the books you read in English class were by men, that would be a male curriculum. If all the history books were about what men had done, that would be male history. If all the authors of the books you're given to learn from in school are male, that's male knowledge. And it's influenced by male privilege. It's not the fault of the men. But if you have a series of speakers at your school and they're all men, that's male privilege. And you get to hear a lot of men's knowledge that way. But you don't necessarily get to hear women's knowledge unless they happen to quote women to you.
Okay. Why do you not use the term white?
The way Gus has to... Why do I not use the term white supremacy?
Yeah.
Is that what you asked?
Yes, I did.
And it's because the way it was defined by Gus is not a... He's got a lot loaded into that definition about its being intentional. And I say it's embedded in the psyche, but it's not necessarily intentional. So, Gus, are you a male supremacist? You were raised...
I believe Justice has a few more questions, and then...
Okay, well, you could think about this one. You're raised in a patriarchy. Does that make you a male supremacist?
Wait a minute. Justice is asking questions. When she's finished with her questions, then I'll respond.
Okay.
Go ahead, Justice.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Well, to go back to you and your school, if there is an emphasis on the fact that men know so much, or that history should be about men, you're getting a lot of male knowledge there. It's probably white male knowledge, too.
Okay. Where does racism...
I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
Where does racism come from?
It comes from what started as a natural thing, the ability to make pecking orders, better than, worse than. And then it got put into politics and into gender roles and into race relations. And it stopped being a natural biological tendency to make pecking orders and fight for survival. Now, then it became a thing that's national and and involves groups, identifies groups as better than, worse than, and genders as better than, worse than, and nations as better than, worse than, and it became violent on a very big scale. Now, when it's in the natural world, you have one lion killing another lion. That's just, they're not killing more than they can eat. They're not killing more than they need to kill. But when you bring it up to social structures like nations and ethnic groups, then you have mass killings, the Holocaust in Germany, our genocide of native people. And that's where, and racism is one of those great, huge societal forms that it takes. That's my explanation. It started natural, and it became unnatural and massive.
Okay, and then go ahead and ask your question.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm there.
You
what?
Can go ahead. You can go ahead and go ask your question.
Okay. Well, I said to Gus, since he's raised in a patriarchy in which men are in control, does that make, are you a male supremacist?
I am, more than anything, by far, a victim of white supremacy. I do
no,
not
I'm asking you about...
Oh, you're interrupting
asking,
me. You're interrupting me. You're interrupting
well,
me. I want to answer your question. You asked me, am I a male supremacist? I do not have the ability to go out and participate in systematically mistreating anyone. No one has to do anything I say. I don't have the ability to go out and say, well, I don't like this group. I don't like females. I don't like people who wear green shirts. I don't have the ability to do that in a system of white supremacy. I understand that there are many individuals who are mistreated for a myriad of reasons. You have people who are mistreated because they're females. You have people who are mistreated because of their sexual preference. You have people who are mistreated because they wear glasses. But I have concluded by far the dominant problem of mistreating people on this planet is the system of white supremacy. I suspect you could be practicing racism, white supremacy right now in shifting the discussion to so-called male supremacy on a program that is dedicated to talking about the system of white supremacy. That's my answer.
Well, for me, I got into seeing white privilege through seeing male privilege. And I don't just have one lens for looking at the world. So you do not have the same license that white men have to be in control, to take control. But you are living in a patriarchy in which the example of male control is all around the world, and in the majority of cases, that male control is in the hands of men of color. Whites are a minority in the world. I'm not saying be sorry for us, but I am saying patriarchy is throughout the world. And by being born male, your head has been filled with portraits of males who are in charge. And it's not your fault. It's not a matter of blame, shame, or guilt. But when I say, does that make you a male supremacist? I'm not shifting the discussion. I'm widening it to include another one of the great systems of the world.
Okay. Well, I want to, again, reiterate. I believe you could be practicing white supremacy right now, in my view, in shifting the discussion to so-called male supremacy. What I would like to ask is, you said that your racist views were evident to your non-white colleagues, that you did have condescending views of non-white people. Is that meaning that you have mistreated individuals because they are not white?
I told you that this was attitudes. Mm. Those two attitudes that are so racist and filled with white privilege that I mentioned are attitudes. They don't have to do with actual mistreatment of individuals. The problem is wider than that. So the first thought that I had that I mentioned when I read the essays by black women saying white women are oppressive to work with were, first of all, I don't see how they can say that about us. I think we're nice. Well, first of all, that was naive. Second, it wasn't accurate. But third, it showed, and it didn't show that I was being mean to them exactly. But I had too good an impression of myself and my group, a superior impression, an impression of superiority, which was attitudinal. And then the second one was also, it's an attitude which I name as racist. This attitude, I especially think we're nice if we work with them. That word was a slur, really, but it was in my mind, and so I'm telling you about it. The year was 1980, and that tells you where I was then. And those don't have to be enacted as individual meanness in order to perpetuate racism and create more racism.
Mm-hmm. The thing I wanted to get at that is really important. Hold on one second, because the thing that I wanted to get at that's very important, whether it's that particular situation that you described with the non-white colleagues that you worked with, or at any point in your life, have you mistreated someone because they are not white?
Well, now I'll give you an example, and you can decide whether this is mistreatment. Mm-hmm. I was given a grant that allowed me to bring some people to this institution, 5 a year for 3 years. One of my black colleagues said to me, Peggy, you must spend that money in such a way that at least 2 out of the 5 each year are people of color. And I was grateful that she had said it and that she insisted, and I did it. Now, without her coming to me and saying that, I probably would have had either an all-white group of 5 scholars or maybe 1 scholar of color. That's what I would have done without her intervention. Now, if I had just been left to my own devices, would I have been mistreating women of color? Mm. If I had just been allowed to drift along in my white privileged way, would I have been mistreating women of color?
Are you asking, or is that rhetorical?
Yeah, I'm asking. I'm saying I'll give you the example.
Okay.
Because you asked, have I mistreated?
If you're asking me, I would.
Yeah.
If you're asking me, unfortunately, I would say yes. If non-white people, you would have excluded non-white people, and you said specifically non-white females, then I would say that would be an example of mistreating non-white people. Yeah, I suspect. Yeah. Were you going to say something?
Well, it is a case in point, and I think so. When I said okay, I will, and 40% became the number, the 2 out of 5 each year were scholars of color. I'm very glad I did that. That made the group much, much better. But would I have been actively mistreating women of color if I hadn't listened to my colleague and made them 40%? See, that's the way white privilege works. It's pretty unaware of itself. And also it goes on the old white assumption that we know who the best and the brightest are. And it turns out under white privilege, they turn out to be the people who look like us and whose academic records look like us. So what happens here is, by the fact that I would have overlooked them, I would be just perpetuating the system that kept them on the bottom of all these decisions. Just kept them on the bottom. That's why I think, and the tendency in white minds, as I read us, is to keep putting, through whiteness, keep putting whatever isn't white down below us at the unconscious level more often than the conscious level. Therefore, I would have just drifted along and chosen what looked like the best people until my colleague of color really gave me a directive here. Peggy, you must put 2 women, that's a higher out of 5, two women of color into the 5 each year. You must. She gave it as a moral imperative, and I'm very grateful to her for that.
Okay. I wanted to point out for our listeners, again, this is the C.O.W.S. Context of White Supremacy. Our guest, Dr. Peggy McIntosh. I know lots of the people who are listening to this program may be familiar with white privilege, Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack. Dr. McIntosh, she mailed me several of her other reports.
It's articles. They're articles.
Okay. One of her more recent articles is titled White Privilege, An Account to Spend. In this article, she wrote that one of the things that white people can do to weaken the system of power and privilege, presumably the system of white supremacy, is being more willing to use the terms white superiority and white supremacy in discussing the assumptions and outcomes of white privilege. I would point at her unwillingness to use the term white supremacy. Again, I suspect she could be practicing racism, white supremacy. I did want to share before we go into other questions that I had. When I spoke with Dr. McIntosh about a week ago, before we came on the program, she shared some very interesting things, and I think it would be very constructive if she could reiterate some of those when we were talking about President Obama. And I want to be very clear because she was emphatic about this, and I am too. I have no criticism of President Obama, and she said the same thing. She had no criticism of President Obama. I believe she said that President Obama is the best thing since sliced bread. I didn't say that, but I certainly have no criticism of him. I have no intention of bashing him or jumping up and down to complain about anything he has said or done. But she did point out 2 specific incidents where it looked like racism, white supremacy was at work, and I think the non-white listeners would benefit a lot from hearing this. One of them, President Obama spoke with members of the NAACP recently, and in that conversation he was saying, I'm paraphrasing, he was saying that, non-white people, perhaps black people specifically, since he was talking to the NAACP, no need for excuses. We can't have non-white people, perhaps black people specifically, making excuses for not accomplishing things, not succeeding. We can't, blame other folks for problems. You are in control of your destiny. Again, I'm paraphrasing, but this is about the gist of what he said when he spoke with the NAACP. Dr. McIntosh, could you share your thoughts on what President Obama said to the NAACP about whether or not you think that is an accurate statement?
Well, as I told you, I rarely disagree with anything this man says. I admire him, and we're extremely fortunate, I think, to have him as president. He's better than we deserve as a nation. But I don't agree with him that people of color are in control of their destiny. And I think if you're a person of color growing up under white privilege, whites are getting ahead all the time in ways they don't deserve. And that means if there's a limited number of resources, you're going to be set back by their getting ahead. So I imagine a hypothetical line of justice. You can draw it like a sort of horizon. Below it, people are pushed down through discrimination. And most of the work, the discussion of race has been about that discrimination that pushes groups down below the hypothetical line of justice. But what hasn't been studied, what hasn't been acknowledged, what has been denied, is that above that hypothetical line of justice, certain people, through no virtue of their own, get pushed up and exempted from being discriminated against and allowed to drift through the day without feeling worried about how they're being treated racially, and being assumed to be able to read and write, and being assumed to have kids who will be good in school. That's not fair, and that is the stuff of privilege above the hypothetical line of justice. Now, when President Obama said you are in control of your destiny, even though you're people of color, I would say no way are you. You're born into a system that is putting white people ahead all the time. It isn't fair, and part of your destiny was to be born into that system. You didn't create it. You can't be blamed for it. But I feel that he cannot mention white privilege. He can't do that because the United States population is so much in denial that white privilege exists, that exemption from discrimination exists, that he would be called playing the race card, and he'd be called all kinds of names. He'd be called a reverse racist. He would get into all kinds of trouble if he acknowledged white privilege. But as long as white privilege exists as the racial frame of the country, then people of color are not in control of their destiny. So now I'm going to go over into the gender thing here and say, when I go to a girls' school and I hear the teachers saying to the girls,
I really feel like this is you practicing racism, white supremacy.
Well, it's just
program
a parallel.
Is not about the gender issue. And I, again, want to emphasize, I'm not saying that I don't believe that there are people who are females who are mistreated on that basis all the time. I'm sure that happens, and I even know people who do programs that address that who would love to have you on to talk about that, but that is not the focus of this program.
I'm making an analogy. When I go to girls' schools and hear people tell girls, you can do anything you want, take control of your destiny, I answer, no, I don't agree with that. You cannot do anything you want. You cannot be Pope, for example. You're born into a patriarchy, but your individual effort does make some difference, and that's what I would say about all people of color as well. You cannot take control of your destiny, but you can affect it. You can affect your life circumstances by how much the kind of work, thought, intelligence you put into your choices. You can affect what happens to you. You can influence it. but you can't take control, and you shouldn't be blamed for not taking control.
I wanted to make sure I pointed out for our listeners, too, because I thought this was very important when you shared this before, that number one, had President Obama, when he was speaking with the NAACP, if he had said, hey, we're in a system of white supremacy, you do not have control of your destiny. At the end of the day, me, you, and everybody else who is non-white, we got to answer to these white people at the end of the day. If he had said that, it would have been true, and he would have gotten in trouble with white people. That was number one. And number two, when you say things like that to non-white people, that, hey, no blaming, no excuses, get out there and do, you're in charge of your destiny, it's nobody else's fault, just go do it. And you're in a system of white supremacy that is designed to make sure that non-white people are not able to do the things that they would like and want. Certainly not as easy as a white person is able to do those things.
Yeah.
It sets up a pattern for the victims blaming themselves and each other for when disaster strikes, which inevitably will in a system of white supremacy, for them to internalize, hey, it is me, I'm messed up, or we're messed up, that's why things don't happen. That it sets up a dynamic for the non-white people to really blame and harm themselves because they don't understand there's a system of white supremacy that's responsible for us not being able to achieve things that we would like and to be as successful as we want.
Absolutely. And so it harms people of color when you tell them you can do anything you want. If they then can't, because of the system of white privilege that they're in, then if they've come to believe that they could do anything and then get set back, then depression sets in and self-hatred sets in, and we call it's internalized oppression when you begin to blame yourself for not making it in a system that was set against you from the beginning. So internalized oppression creates a whole lot of damage for folks, and I think it's necessary to say two things are true. One is you've got a strong and sacred identity and you can try to make your way in the world, but don't take the blame for all the systemic things that are in place to hold you back. And so, for example, the school child, the parent takes the child to school. The teacher sees that the parent is a person of color, may have seen it already in the face of the child, depends on what we're talking about. But in any case, the teacher is likely at the unconscious level to assume that this child of color will not be able to read and write as well as the white kids will be. No way should the black family have to take the blame for that teacher's racism. But that teacher by low expectations or no expectations or through fear can be an impediment to that child's learning to read and write. And I have an African American friend who entered school as I did, realizing that we don't really like to read books all the way through. We dip in here and there. Now, because he's African American, it was projected by his teachers onto him that he couldn't do the work and didn't get it. Because I'm white and I was blonde, it was projected by my teachers onto me for this same habit, that I didn't really need to read the book through because I was smart enough not to have to. And as he grew up, he came into a sense, I'm never good enough. I'm not smart enough. Because he internalized what his teachers thought of him for skimming books. As I grew up, I came into a sort of white arrogant attitude. I'm superior to the school that expected me to do something as dumb as reading through a book. And the school accepted that and projected onto me that I had a superior intellect. Now he, as an African American, was punished for a behavior that I, as a white, was rewarded for. That's white privilege at work. And so now he thinks every day, in the very good job he has, I'm not good enough. And I think every day, well, when it comes to cleaning up the papers in my office and so on, I might think I'm not good enough, but basically I'll feel I'm good enough to live a life that will be useful. I'm good enough. Of course, I'm going to be hated by the far right, but that's the price you pay for writing about white privilege. But that example of myself and my colleague getting two different results for identical behavior, which is we just dipped into the books, but we didn't really read them. That shows you how deep it is. And in order for me to benefit from it, I don't have to be what you call a white supremacist in any intentional way. I just drift through experiencing the life above that hypothetical line of justice. And I don't even know I'm experiencing it until I begin to be in conversation. In this case, he and I got into conversation over our habits. And he called his a learning disability. And I said, well, actually, I started it. I said, I have a learning disability. I don't read books from the beginning to the end. And I've gotten to the point where I really can't. Actually, I have to tell you, last night I was reading W.E.B. Du Bois for the first time in many years. And I said to myself, wow, it looks to me as though I'm going to be reading this book from end to end. I feel none of the usual need to skip and dip in and go on. I'm learning from this rereading in such a way that I'm just going to take a whole month over it, but I'm going to read it all cover to cover.
Outstanding. I want to make sure I pull my co-host in so she doesn't get left out here. Justice, if you've thought of some more questions, go right ahead and ask. Oh, and speak up real loud.
If, when you were talking about how good enough you were, how are you good enough when you practice white supremacy?
Well, that's the thing. First of all, I talked about white privilege. So what happens when you've got white privilege is you come to think you're good enough. It brings arrogance. So it's an arrogant attitude. And I'm just telling you that I do have it. Because teachers always gave me credit for being good. And I internalize that superiority. So sometimes we talk about internalized oppression, internalized racial oppression, where people come to feel bad about themselves because they're people of color and they've drunk in all the negative messages. But in the work I do, we also talk about internalized superiority, in which you become convinced that you're as good as white society told you you were, and that makes you, and that makes you terrible to be with. It's part of whiteness. It makes you very proud, and at times it becomes conscious, and then it is supremacist. That's the times when you think, I'm so good, I and people like me really should be in charge. And that's conscious white supremacy. But most white privilege isn't that conscious and doesn't express itself in convictions like that we should be in charge. We just drift around getting white privilege without knowing that we don't deserve it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then what does racism do?
What racism does is kill people spiritually and bodily. I've mentioned some wars. It kills people culturally, emotionally. Racism is a killer. It kills your body, it kills your... Well, if it doesn't kill your body, and there's some evidence, from the medical profession that it does kill your body, that in the case of black women, there's a lot of high blood pressure probably caused by the social stress of living within racism. But it destroys, whether you're practicing racism as a white person or practicing or experiencing racism as a person of color, your body, mind, soul are being eroded and destroyed rapidly in war and not so rapidly in so-called peace. But it's one of the great killers of the planet. Now, when it doesn't kill, sometimes it just demoralizes, but it definitely results in bad distribution of all the goods and services of the world: food, clothing, shelter, water. They're not well distributed, and some would say, well, that's chiefly because of capitalism, and some would say it's chiefly because of patriarchy. To me, it's very clear that racism is a major actor here, probably the major actor in the bad maldistribution, that is the wrong distribution of the goods of the earth. You'll notice that when there's a famine, it's people of color who are suffering the most. And you'll notice wherever there's a big concentration of money, there are Europeans and European Americans and whites are doing the best. I'm exaggerating somewhat. For example, the Asian countries now have a lot of very rich people, and they're not white. So I'm exaggerating somewhat. But in countries where there's a lot of poverty, Argentina or Brazil or Venezuela, actually Venezuela's changed, but with those other two, you'll generally find that because of racism, or what some people call colorism, the lighter skinned people have the most money and the darkest skinned people have the less. So even if there aren't any strictly white European people in those places, the influence of white European privilege still obtains, and the darkest are seen as lower caste and not worthy of food, clothing, shelter, in the same way that the lighter skinned are.
Okay, do you think you can lower the vocabulary level for me? Because it's a bit too high.
Oh, okay. Well, you asked what racism does, and I said it's a killer. And I said it kills bodies and minds and spirits. And then I got into something called colorism. Did you know that word before? Colorism?
No, I don't know what colorism means.
Okay. Well, we have it in this country, and you see it around the world. In general, the people who are the darkest skinned are considered by those who are the lighter skinned to be inferior. And they get less food, less clothing, less shelter, less water, less money, fewer good jobs. Well, we have it in this country too. I learned that word from my colleagues of color, colorism. It means that even within African American groups, the lighter skinned ones will get more from the whites in charge than the darker skinned people will. And there's a film called The Color of Fear, and a man named Victor Lewis is in it. And he's quite a light-skinned African American. And during that film, he turns to a much darker-skinned friend of his who's a school teacher and says, I'm given goodies by the society because I'm a lighter complexion than Lauren here. And he's not boasting, of course. He's not approving of that situation. But he's saying that within a white world, whites give more rewards to people they think look more like them. That's white privilege. So he experiences white privilege even though he's not a white. But he had ancestors who were white. And that makes more things are given to him. That means more things are given to him than are given to his very dark-skinned teacher friend, Lauren. I recognize both of those men as very great teachers for me, and I like the film that was made called The Color of Fear. It's a great film, and one of the reasons those men are willing to work with me is that I recognize white privilege. But what Victor is saying is, I even benefit from this sick system of white privilege because I'm lighter skinned than my darker skinned friend, so I get more goodies from white society. Was that clear? Was that clearer?
Yeah, that was clear. That was better.
Good.
Okay.
I hope in school that some of the teaching is about this kind of thing. Are you getting any teaching about racism and white privilege in your school?
Never.
That's terrible.
To be expected.
Well, it's average, but that's terrible. Because justice is ready to think, talk, and contribute on these things.
Mhm.
And all the whites in the school need to talk, think, consider on the fact that they're white. Okay, so your next question?
My next question is, how is racism confusing and mistreating non-white people directly and indirectly?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you, so could you say it again?
Yeah. How is racism confusing and mistreating non-white people directly and indirectly?
So the part I heard was, how is racism confusing and mistreating people of color? Non-white people. And what were the last words?
Directly and indirectly.
Okay. Directly, racism denies white skin privilege and confuses non-whites into thinking they've caused their own problem. That's deeply confusing, to be blamed for problems that you're having that you didn't create, that are in the structures, like school curriculum. Mistreating comes when, well, in this town of Boston, you find a white police department pretty much gives up on gangs, people of color, just says, oh, they'll shoot them out. That's just what they're like. They wouldn't do that with whites. So the police mistreat people of color here by not giving them the same kind of attention and protection from others and protection from each other that they need and deserve. They're paying taxes too. So they're mistreated every time the police ignore what's going on. But in addition, sometimes the police are actually shooting people of color themselves, more in New York and Los Angeles than here. But if the people who are supposed to keep us safe have either given up on or attack people of color, that's mistreating them. Now, the indirect effects of racism come when whites deny that we didn't earn what we've got. And then the whole system is, and this is true in most of the United States, that whites believe people find their own level, quote unquote, and if you're doing badly, that must be because you're misbehaving or not seeing things correctly. And then whites just let all the racial tension, dislike, mistrust, ignorance continue, as if it weren't there. Now, some people call this refusing to face the elephant in the room. That is, as if we're all sitting around in a room and there's a big elephant, and that's racism, and we deny that it's there. We deny that there's unequal treatment. And we, I've named a myth, one of the myths that white people use to keep racism in place, and it's monoculture. It's the idea that there's just one great big American culture, and we're all in it in pretty much the same, we experiencing it pretty much the same way, and if you're experiencing it as not good, there must be something wrong with you. Either your behavior or your vision must be wrong. So, the belief in monoculture indirectly causes a refusal to face all the bad things that are going on racially here. And that is to just be a nice, normal white person believing that you're colorblind. That is mistreatment of people you've been trying to say we're not having the same experience you are. I call it, I think of it as mistreatment. I think of very well-meaning white people saying, I'm colorblind, I never see color. There's lots of research that shows people do see color. And that denial is mistreatment. It's like saying, everything you're telling me about my experience doesn't count.
Okay, and why does racism have to be here?
I don't think it does have to be here. I think the natural competitiveness doesn't infect whole societies and all groups. So I use the example of one lion killing another lion, or one lizard killing another lizard. They don't get armies and try to wipe out the whole population. They're probably fighting over some available food. So I think racism is not natural because it affects whole nations, whole populations. It goes way back, but I think if we would learn from the four-legged creatures, we would see the unnaturalness of racism. Now, lots of people disagree with me strongly. They say, oh, it's natural not to like or trust those who look differently from you. But I don't believe that. I think we just created this system, but I don't think we were, and of course it was created hundreds of years ago, but I don't think it's natural. I don't think human beings have to be this violent.
And the next question is, who do you learn from that teaches you how to practice racism?
Did you say, who did I learn from?
Yes, that teaches you how to practice racism.
It goes back way early to, well, I'm sure it was around me in communities. I was born in Brooklyn, New York, but then my parents moved to a white community in New Jersey, and I think that being surrounded by whites taught me racism, taught me that whites were the way to be. Whiteness was the way to be. But there was a very strong teaching from my grandmother when I think I was about 6 years old. And she had a cook who was African American, and I loved her cook, Bessie. And my grandmother was white. And one day, after we had been visiting my grandmother in Pennsylvania, my mother was driving me and herself back to New Jersey, where we lived. And we were in the car.
Hello?
What?
I'm sorry, but I did not say did, I said do. What the question was, who do you learn from now that teaches you how to practice racism?
Oh, who do I learn from now?
Yep.
So you don't want to hear the rest of my story about my grandmother teaching it to me?
No, I want it,
Okay, who do I learn it from now?
Who teaches it now, yes.
Okay. Well, I would say when I agree to read the paper, I'm getting a very white version of life. So the paper, if I don't read it very critically, will make me more of a racist every time I read it. So the papers, I mean, are the New York Times and the Boston Globe. The papers are a major teacher of racism because they keep emphasizing white points of view. So they're my major teacher. If I let them be. And then there's the radio, and even National Public Radio, which tries to be what it calls liberal, features white commentators. There are a few who aren't white. There's Juan Williams, for example. But many of the commentators are white. And if I listen to them without critiquing what they say or critiquing the station, that's teaching me racism too. So I see I've turned to the media as my major teachers, and I think it's true for many Americans. I don't really watch TV, but if I did, I would get it right off the TV too. The racism that says whites are most important. The white privilege that says whites are most important.
Okay, now when you were talking about the two men earlier.
Yes.
Were the two men white?
Yes. Well, it depends. I was talking about Victor Lewis and Lauren. They're both men of color. They're both African American, those two. They're in the film that I mentioned called The Color of Fear.
Okay, that doesn't really answer my question. I just need a white or a non-white.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
I said that didn't answer my question.
Oh, it did. Did I answer your question?
No, I just needed if they were white or non-white.
Okay. Those two men were African American. But when I was first talking to Gus, I was talking about white men in seminars. But the ones who had the discussion about skin color, those two were African American.
So the two white men were white, but they spoke African, whatever that language was, or what you said.
Are you talking about when I was talking about colorism and how lighter skin gave more goodies to the lighter-skinned man that the darker-skinned man had? They're both African American. But because of their ancestry, that is, there's more white blood in Victor than there is in Lauren. Victor was saying, it's not fair, but because I'm lighter-skinned, white people are less threatened by me. They have less fear of me. They will feel they can work with me in a way that they will not feel about you. He's not saying it's fair. He's talking about the history of white rapes of black women in the days of slavery, and the way there's a lot of white blood in a person like him, and like his mother. His mother's pretty light-skinned too. So he was saying when you're talking about race, you need to be aware of all of these dimensions of how whiteness has distorted our lives as non-whites. Is that clearer?
Do you think you can say that one more time?
The lighter-skinned African-American man said that because of the white blood in him, white people in general felt they could work with a person like him better. They were less afraid than of a darker-skinned African-American, like his friend, the school teacher, Lauren. And he's not saying it's right. He's not saying it should be this way. He's just talking about the lingering, the long-lasting effects of whites raping black women during slavery and producing so much white blood in, blood is red, but genetically speaking, there's a lot of whiteness in Victor. And he's saying it's not fair the way that puts him ahead of his darker-skinned friend. And that's one of the legacies. That's one of the facts of white privilege, that lighter-skinned people of color get given more opportunities than darker-skinned.
Okay. But but all I need an answer is just if the men were just white or non-white. Just pick one of those two, please.
I'm sorry, you'll have to say it again. I didn't hear.
Okay. All I need you to answer is just if the two men were white or non-white.
Non-white.
Thank you. I don't have any more questions right now.
Okay. I'll come back in a second or two and see if you've thought of some more questions. It took me a while. I suspect Justice doesn't use the term African American, so that might have thrown her off. I think that's why she thought that was a language they were speaking.
I see.
She doesn't use that term, and I don't either. Actually,
I see. No wonder that. Now I understand her question about what they were speaking. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's it. Actually wanted to, again, context of white supremacy, I guess, Dr. Peggy McIntosh, again, from her report, White Privilege, An Account to Spend, she said that one of the ways white people, or I guess anyone, can work to weaken systems of power and privilege, presumably the system of white supremacy, is being more willing to use the terms white superiority and white supremacy, and she has been resistant to using the term white supremacy today. She indicated she did not think my definition was correct. She did not supply her own definition for the term. She has just been more comfortable using the term white privilege.
And white superiority.
I haven't really heard that as much as I've heard white privilege, and I believe that you could be, probably are, consciously practicing racism, white supremacy, in doing that. I was told by an admitted white supremacist known as Jessica Pettit. I don't know if you know her or not. She's been, she told me she's been to the White Privilege Conference, so I don't know, you might have bumped into her there. She also alleges to do anti-racist work. That perhaps I should not attend the White Privilege Conference coming in April because the white people there, she didn't say white people, but I suspect the white people there might harm me. She used the word harm because they would make foolishness of my logic. I want to test that out here because, number one, I think the system of white supremacy is the most accurate term, and I'll ask a question to clarify this. You're using the term white privilege. You're saying that white people have all of these benefits, passports, checked, unearned privilege. What exactly produces white privilege? What and whom?
Well, I think white privilege is the main factor in racism.
Whoa, 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 whoa. What produces the white privilege that you and all the other people have? That is the question. What and whom produces white privilege?
It's the main factor in racism. It is whites taking control, consciously or unconsciously. And that produces, and it's a long historical process, it's been going on for hundreds of years, and it produces structures that carry, it's not just individuals, whole structures, like the knowledge structure, carry white power and white rules.
Okay. Now, my definition, I said white supremacy is a global system of people who classify themselves as white and are dedicated to abusing and or subjugating everyone in the known universe whom they say is not white. That sounds very close to what you just said, because you just said white people who go around and produce structures to maintain dominance over non-white people. That sounds very close to what I said in explaining the system of white supremacy, which I think is a much more accurate term than white privilege. And again, I want to highlight, you are the only white person who has been on this program who has not agreed with that definition.
Well, maybe they haven't been listening as closely as I have. You say it's a system of people. I say it's a system, and you say I say it's a system of institutions, and you imply that the infant white is dedicated to abusing and subjecting creatures that he or she hasn't even met yet. So I'm an English teacher. I listen very carefully to the way things are framed. And
creature, that's interesting. That word has a lot of connotations.
Yeah.
And I want to point out, I've also had a lot of doctors in English on the program. Dr. Martin Kevorkian, he is an English professor with a PhD in English. He agreed with that term and the definition that I used. C.O.W.S, she teaches writing at Northwestern University. She agreed. Dr. John Harvey, he is at Cambridge, English PhD. He agreed. So there have been a myriad of people, law professors as well, who have agreed. You are the only white person who has not agreed.
And I'm the only one who wrote the analysis of white privilege that has spread around the world, because it put a new light on what racism is and opened up a whole new dimension. And that whole new dimension is both conscious and unconscious.
Again, I want to point out, I have never said the terms conscious or unconscious. I did not mention it in my definition. I have not brought up at all whether I think white people do this consciously or unconsciously, although I suspect it's both conscious and unconscious.
I think that's right. I think that's right, that it's conscious and unconscious.
Although I do want to point out, I do want to take a moment to point out, though, I believe, and I feel the evidence shows this, I even feel that your work evidences this, white people are very aware, consciously aware of racism. In fact, I believe white people are far more informed about the system of racism, white supremacy, than non-white people. I don't even think it's close, and that's why I work to get more white people on my program, because when white people evidence that they are not following the rules of racism, white supremacy, or that they are ignorant of racism, white supremacy, they get in trouble with other white people. It becomes conscious real quick, because white people will let you know you are making errors. You should not be doing that. And when I say conscious, I don't mean that white people know the entire legacy of the system of white supremacy, the entire legacy of history, the entire history of so-called apartheid in South Africa, the entire history of redlining. All I mean is, if you are a white person, you got to know how you are supposed to relate to individuals who are classified as not white. You got to be able to pick out who is white and who is not white, and you got to know how you are supposed to relate to non-white people as a white person. Every white person in the system of white supremacy has to be aware of those two things. That's my view. Now, if you think that's incorrect, please share that with our listeners.
You're very much implying that all white people know what's in my paper. Well, I can tell you,
I didn't say that.
It is still considered new.
I did not say that. All I said was that white people in a system of white supremacy have to be able to do two things which allows them to consciously practice racism, white supremacy. And those two things are, you have to be able to pick out who is white, who is not white, and you got to know white people are supposed to dominate. How I'm supposed to relate to non-white people is that white people are supreme. That is always supposed to be the case. I didn't say anything about your paper. I'm sure there are hordes of white people who have no idea who you are, no idea what your paper is talking about, but they know they're white and they know how they are supposed to relate to non-white people. That is specifically what I said.
Here's an example, one of the 46 in my first paper from 22 years ago.
She's not responding to what I said.
Yeah, no, but I'm giving you an example. I can choose blemish cover or bandages in so-called flesh color and have them more or less match my skin. Mindless whites are buying Band-Aids. When we put that Band-Aid on our flesh, are not thinking white supremacy or even racism, but I need a Band-Aid. So much of racism takes place at a level that whites were taught not to see. And your definition is very intentional about people who classify themselves. Now, this baby just born hasn't classified itself, and it isn't dedicated to abusing or subjecting people of color. But it will get the training. It will get the training in schools like Justice's School, where race will be a taboo subject. And the myth of monoculture and several other myths I wrote about in my most recent paper will take over the head, and then the impulse for control will be licensed, and all the historical figures will be white men, and power will seem okay, and money will be valorized, and so on. And so the whole training of the white person will help the white person to think well of themselves. And this is my experience, maybe because I deal with women more than men, is they'll be led to believe that pretty much everything is okay with the world, and if other people just behaved like us, then we wouldn't have all these problems. That's one of the themes in The Color of Fear. So that's the way I see it. And my 46 examples of unearned advantage that I wrote down as coming to me once I began to take seriously that black women had said white women were oppressive to work with. These examples, a lot of them don't have any bad intentionality. For example, when I move into new housing, I can be pretty sure that my neighbors in such a location will be neutral or pleasant to me. That's that assurance and that peacefulness. Or I can go shopping alone most of the time, pretty well assured that I won't be followed or harassed. Or I can turn on TV or open to the front page of the paper and see people of my race widely and positively represented. Or in school, when I was taught about civilization, I was shown that people of my color gave it its good points. Or I can be sure that my children, who are white, will be given curricular materials that testify to the existence of our race. Now, none of these have meanness and violence in them overtly, but they're part of a system of white skin privilege in which they come to think of themselves as normal, and we come to think of ourselves as not only normal but superior. Within this list of 46, there's that there's that theme of unearned peacefulness, like point number 27. I can go home from most meetings of organizations I belong to feeling somewhat tied in, rather than isolated, out of place, outnumbered, unheard, held at a distance, or feared. Or 28, I can be pretty sure that an argument with a colleague of another race is more likely to jeopardize her chances for advancement than to jeopardize mine.
Okay.
And the next
Again,
one,
I want to point out,
I can be pretty sure that if I argue for the promotion of a colleague of another race, and say this person should be promoted, or if I argue for a program centering on race, this isn't likely to cost me heavily within my present setting, even if my colleagues disagree with me. So I'm writing here about unearned safety.
Right, I understand that, and I again want to point out, I do not think, responded to what I said. You certainly didn't say that what I said was inaccurate, which I thought was going to be the case. I also want to point out, because I believe your work suggests white people are not ignorant about racism, white supremacy. You said in your article, white people facing race, uncovering the myths that keep racism in place.
Yeah.
You listed that some of the remarks that white people make before these discussions on racism, white supremacy begin, one of them is, my racism may show. That is incredibly contradictory. If someone is ignorant about racism, I would expect them to say, racism? What are you talking about? I don't even know what that is. Not, my racism may show. And I have encountered this over and over and over in the white people that I have talked to, where they will say at first, well, no, and then they will start talking about how their parents said racist jokes, their friends have said racist jokes. I don't even count anymore the number of white people who begin to share racist jokes and other elements of racism, white supremacy. And again, this program, other than you, every white person has agreed with the definition. With the non-white people who've come on my show, half of them have said either they don't think we're in a system of white supremacy or they don't think that definition is correct. Non-white people are the ones who are confused about racism, white supremacy, ignorant about how that system works and what it is that white people do to expand, maintain, and refine that system. And one of the ways, really one of the most dangerous ways that I see that ignorance manifested in non-white people is that they praise and are completely unsuspicious of C.O.W.S, an admitted white supremacist, Jessica Pettit, an admitted white supremacist, Noel Ignatieff, who admitted to having mistreated people because they're not white on this program, and yourself. They think you all, not President Obama, are the greatest things since sliced bread. They think you all do fantastic work. They love your reports. They think you are just the swellest people that God ever created. They think there's no way possible that you all participate in the system of white supremacy, and that is completely untrue. C.O.W.S even said he thinks that is the most dangerous thing when he sees non-white people who are not suspicious of himself and all white people. So I'll ask you, should non-white people correctly, accurately be suspicious of every white person in a system of white supremacy, including yourself?
In a system of white privilege, yes. In a system of white privilege, people of color should understand we were set up. We were set up to betray them. They shouldn't trust us, except insofar as they can use us to advance their own survival. But no, we can't be trusted. Now, I want to read something I wrote 20 years ago. A black man disagreed on the radio program with my statement that the privilege of whites is unearned. He said whites earn it through white supremacy. He said, that's the rules of the game. White supremacists get it all. A few minutes later, this same caller asked me whether I thought some of us, that is, some of my race, were a little bit less white supremacist than others. I did not like his assumption that all whites are white supremacists, but I have to take it seriously because it parallels my perception that all white men are patriarchal in their habits of mind and behavior because of the cultural structures they were born into, though some of them are indeed less patriarchal than others. Before this conversation, white supremacist was a label I had associated only with those who say that white people are superior and should control others. So, Gus, this is that intentionality I was talking to you about. Yet white men who do not... I wrote this in 1989 after a radio talk show with Brenda Montgomery in Chicago. Okay, so I wrote... So I was telling about my thought process after that caller, and I said, before I had associated the word white supremacist, the phrase white supremacist, only with those who say that white people are superior and should control others. Yet white men who do not explicitly say they are superior or that they should control women usually just go ahead and accept whatever unearned public and private powers they are given. They seem to me to embody and enact patriarchy, however non-sexist they may seem to themselves to be. I can therefore see how whites can be seen as white supremacists. White women and men think that we are decent, fair, open, sympathetic, while being seen as white supremacists anyway, unless we have, this is important for your listeners and your show, explicitly disowned or worked against inherited racial systems and the look of superiority which privileged systems unfairly gave us. And then indeed we may seem, quote, a little bit less white supremacist than others. But there are times, and I did it once in this program, when the conviction of superiority and the clear taking of control comes quite into the conscious mind, as like apartheid laws in South Africa. And that's conscious white supremacist behavior. I don't think the newborn child has it, but the schools are going to try to give that child a sense that white is normal, white is good, white is American, and that's all just very dangerous. So people of color shouldn't trust us. We are white.
I agree wholeheartedly. I do, again, want to point out I never mentioned anything about newborn children that are classified as white, although I suspect as long as the system of white supremacy exists, they are going to be racist white supremacists when they are able to function as such, and seems like you just co-signed on that. Are you? I want to see if we can get a caller in the last couple of minutes.
I co-sign on the fact that they're being given white privilege, which will distort their personalities the same way that the lack of white privilege, black disadvantage or Asian
non-white disadvantage,
distorts others. But don't keep attributing white supremacy to me. That's a longer conversation, and as you can hear in that meditation that I read to you, I am struggling with the matter of when white supremacy is conscious and when it manifests itself chiefly, as it does in David Christensen in The Color of Fear, as white arrogance based on white privilege.
Okay. I again want to read White Privilege, An Account to Spin. Dr. McIntosh said, being more willing to use the terms white superiority and white supremacy is one of the ways we could work against systems of power and privilege.
That's right. And you notice I said...
Wait a second, because I want to see if we can take a couple, at least one or two calls before we end the broadcast here. Could you tell them the website for your...
I have... by the way, notice I said more willing. You can see it's a work in progress.
Oh, I see. You have work to go in regards to being more comfortable with using that term, in my view. And I could be incorrect.
Well, I have a way to go with regard to my willingness. So I said more willing than I used to be. But anybody who wants to talk about race without bringing in privilege is just missing the boat as far as I'm concerned. Once you know about white privilege, you should see that as the major actor. Because it's in 300 million people in the United... No, I'm sorry, we're not that many. But a good 350 million people in the United States.
Okay. 862, if you have a quick question you would like to ask Dr. McIntosh, go right ahead.
Hello.
Hi.
I would like to talk to you. I'm from California, and my name is Kelvin.
Are you a white person or a non-white person?
I'm African American, and I'm interested in your program. I understand what your situation is. I do.
Uh-huh.
Were you talking to me or Dr. McIntosh?
I'm talking to the Dr. McIntosh. I want to try to understand your situation. I want to try to get to some understanding of what the KKK stood for and why they would try to control people, and how white people are fine. They're friendly to other white people, but if you're not of their same color, they're hateful. I want to try to get to understand your perspective.
Well, I think what you've said is true. They're not all they're not all hateful in the same way in every situation. I work with a lot of teachers in California, and they're not hateful to their students, but they're usually not very aware of their white privilege if they're white. So they're not aware that their life has gone the way it has because they were given the benefit of the doubt that they didn't earn. And in California, the prisons are practically full of people of color who didn't earn incarceration but encountered all the unfairness of the legal systems that are very white.
301, are you there with a question for Dr. McIntosh?
Yes, hello, Gus. This is Jamal.
Yes, sir.
How you doing?
I'm well, sir. How are you?
I have a question. When did you realize that you wanted to do this type of work, and why?
I was about 45 years old, and I came to see men who were very nice, nevertheless owned the knowledge system in the colleges. All the courses were about men. And I finally came to see niceness has nothing to do with it. These are nice men, but they were taught that knowledge is their bag and the rest of us are not really in it. And then I realized, because I had read black women's writings in the year 1980 that said, white women are oppressive to work with. I said, oh Lord, there's a correspondence here. Once I got over my shock at what they'd said, I said to myself, well, I was the wrong sex to get into the knowledge system. It's clear that women aren't seen as knowers. Knowledge isn't seen as something females have. But I was the right color to get into the knowledge system, because I was taught whites have knowledge, and whites are knowers. And did that make me oppressive to work with? And I had to say, I dithered over it, and I had to finally realize, of course that made me oppressive to work with. And then I said, well, no wonder I can get grants. My colleagues who are African American can't get grants from foundations, can't get money, and I can. Well, that's because the money system is run by people who look like me. Well, they're male, but they're white. And then I asked, well, what else do I have that I didn't earn beside the knowledge system and the money system being on my side? And in the end, I had to pray over it. And my subconscious knew what I didn't want to consciously know. That's one reason why I'm really very interested in the difference between subconscious and conscious knowledge of all this. And it gave me, my subconscious gave me 46 examples over 3 months, usually in the middle of the night. And I don't know if you heard me reading some of them a few minutes ago, but they were examples like the Band-Aid, or being sure my new neighbors will be nice to me. That all of that is racial. It's racial. I can be pretty sure that my neighbors in a new location will be neutral or pleasant to me. All that is knowledge about what it meant to be white that I was never taught to know. And that's why my paper still seems new to people, because it was the first expose of one white woman's subconscious mind telling her what she had never seen as racial.
I want to make sure I don't leave Justice out, because sometimes I forget about her. I'm still getting accustomed to having a co-host. Justice, have you thought of a question that you'd like to ask before I get ready to wrap things up?
Yes.
Okay, make sure you speak up real loud.
Okay. When non-white people do not like white supremacy, then why do you and other white people keep practicing white supremacy? Why you keep doing it?
Well, like Gus, you keep putting words in my mouth, so that's not okay with me. But if I know that people of color, non-white people, don't like white privilege, why do I keep using it? And the answer is, in most cases, I can't help it. Like, I'm driving home tonight, and I look like a white person, and I can't help that. But that also means that the cops in this town won't arrest me, because they see it's a white person, and then they say, well, so she can't really be, she must belong here. So that's the kind of example where people of color or non-whites driving through the town where my college is, they hate to be arrested, of course. But by disapproving of their arrests and by protesting to the police about arresting non-whites, that doesn't mean that the police will arrest me instead. However, I have found 11 ways in which I can use my white skin privilege to weaken the system of white skin privilege. And they have to do with the way I use my money. They have to do with visiting the police to protest the harassment of African Americans. They have to do with organizing so that people of color may move into my neighborhood if they wish. They have to do with hiring and supporting people of color. They have to do with pressuring supermarkets to stock the foods that my black friends would like to find in the supermarkets. So I can do some things to use my white privilege to try to change things. But I can't just say one day, okay, I'm going to stop using white privilege. The whole system favors my whiteness.
Okay, and then about what you said, just putting words in my mouth, what do you mean by that?
From the beginning of the program, I have said that I do not agree with Gus's particular definition of white supremacy, and so I still don't. In many ways, we're doing work that is for the same end. Both of us want social justice instead of racism. So that's why I'm on his show, because I think he's working for the right ends. I'm not sure what ends he's working for, but I think they have to do with social justice. And I don't agree with his definition of white supremacy, and I don't agree with his sense of how racism manifests itself shows itself in our society. He thinks it's much
I
more
again
obvious.
want to point out
Hello?
she has not volunteered her own definition for white supremacy, even though her work suggests it would be constructive if everyone became more comfortable using the term white supremacy. She has not volunteered her own definition for white supremacy, which other people have done on this program, supplied their definition for white supremacy.
Hello?
Yes, sir. I can hear you, but hold on one second.
Okay, go ahead.
Dr. McIntosh did say she had exactly 2 hours, and I want to honor that.
Yeah, we've
as
gone
we
over
as we exit the program, you did say one of the ways that you try to work against racism, white supremacy, compensating the non-white people who have been mistreated. Do you think you could work on getting me a round-trip bus ticket, just a bus ticket, to the White Privilege Conference? It's in April, so you would have a lot of time to see if you could get other white people. Perhaps they could chip in, make it a project. A round-trip bus ticket, that would be helpful. I really want to go to the White Privilege Conference. I have never been. I have had Dr. Moore on the program. I would be ecstatic to go. Is that something you would be willing to work on?
Well, why don't you ask Dr. Moore whether he will bring you in as a guest?
He said I could come. The first time I talked to him, he said, come, I got you. I would love to have all the speakers come and talk, and I could do a show live from there. I'm just working on transportation, and I think it would be correct to ask a white person, since we are in a system of what you say is white privilege, what I say is white supremacy, to ask a white person if they would be willing to help get me a round-trip bus ticket from Seattle to Wisconsin, where the White Privilege Conference is going to be this coming April.
I don't think I will, because you kept putting words in my mouth about white supremacy and not respecting what I wanted to say about white supremacy, which is that it's much more conscious and less intentional than what you say it is. So
okay.
At that level, I don't agree with you.
I again want to reiterate, that's fine. I've had people come on the program who do not agree, and that's fine. But I have
a different sense of it.
That's fine. I have not attributed that you do agree with my definition. In fact, I have continued to highlight that you do not agree. I don't believe that that's what you call putting words in your mouth, but that's fine. I want to thank you for coming on the program and sharing your views. It has been constructive, even though I suspect you have practiced a most refined form of racism, white supremacy, on this program and in your work. Well,
you're more than entitled to think that. It's a free country.
Really?
It's actually a system of white supremacy, but, at this point, I am permitted to express that view. Thank you. If there's anything you would like to say before exiting, feel free to do so.
No, I told you I had 2 hours, and I appreciate your holding it to 2 hours.
No problem. No problem. Thank you for coming on the program, and hopefully if you're at the White Privilege Conference this spring, hopefully I will bump into you. Thank you so much for coming on the program, Dr. Peggy McIntosh.
I want to say goodbye to Justice.
Oh. Justice, you there?
Yes, I am.
Oh, okay.
Thank you for your questions.
Thank you.
Bye for now.
Thank you, Dr. McIntosh.
Right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Dr. Peggy McIntosh, author of White Privilege, Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack, and many other reports. I actually wish I had got the report she was quoting from before she left the program, but very interesting. I suspect a very refined racist, white supremacist. Her unwillingness to even supply her own definition for white supremacy when it's in her report that she suggests using that term. This is exactly what Jessica Pettit, admitted white supremacist, pointed out in her report, Showing Up White, that white people will get in discussions of racism and they will make it safe for them. And she said, practice racism, white supremacy, either consciously or unconsciously, not using the most accurate terms to talk about racism, white supremacy. She is actually contradicting what she said in her own report, and I hope everyone who listens to this program really evaluate what she said if it makes logical sense to you and if you think she could have been practicing racism. I do, and I again want to highlight she did not respond to my comments when I said white people have to be able to distinguish between who is white, who is not white, and they have to keep in mind how they are supposed to relate to non-white people in a system of white supremacy. She did not respond at all. I again want to point out, I think I'm accurate on that, and I think she was practicing racism. Mr. Hill, if you have a comment you would like to make before we wrap things up here, go right ahead.
Yeah, that kind of bothers me when I notice when you have these people on here, like people who write these books, and you read their information and their, the stuff that, their books and their material, and then you quote from their books and their materials. All of a sudden they get, and you pose a question, and all of a sudden they get amnesia. Like, I didn't really say it in that context. Well, it was in the abstract. So, that is, as you know, is a confusion as white supremacy does. You know what I'm saying? It's amazing.
I agree wholeheartedly.
Because go ahead. So it's amazing how every every white person you had on has always misquote their own writings, and I'm like, you wrote it, so how can you misquote it? So very good program, by the way. She has very good. She's very constructive. She explained herself better than most white people you had on your show.
Oh yeah, I knew Dr. McIntosh. I told Back of the Bus before the program, I felt like if I had to describe her, she was a combination of Dr. Kenneth O'Reilly, Tim Wise, and Farrell Winfrey. If you could kind of sprinkle all them together, I think that would be Dr. Peggy McIntosh. And that's not anything to disrespect her. Just I have a lot of respect for those three people. I had all three of them on the show. But yeah, I think she's very knowledgeable of racism, white supremacy. She has a lot of experience with it. She's been doing this work a long time. And I suspect, just like the other three, I suspect she consciously practices racism, white supremacy, and did so on this program. And I hope everyone caught when she referenced non-white people as creatures. I said it several times, so I hope if you didn't, please go back, listen to the program. She referenced non-white people as creatures. And, Mr. Hill, I should have a surprise for you. September 20, I'm just telling you now so you have an opportunity to read the book.
Right.
You said you would like a program on racism, white supremacy in sports.
Right.
There's a white man, University of Texas, Austin. He will be the third guest from University of Texas, Austin, along with Dr. Martin Kevorkian and Dr. Robert Jensen. His name is Dr. John Hoberman.
Okay.
He wrote a book called Darwin's Athlete, and it talks about exactly what you said.
Darwin's
Athlete, yes.
Can you spell Darwin for me?
D as in dog.
Okay.
ARWIN''S athlete. Darwin's Athlete.
Okay, and his name is what?
Dr. John Hoberman.
Hold up, John Hoberman. Spell his last name?
H-O-B as in boy, E-R-M-A-N. Dr. John Hoberman. He's at
so that's H-O. Okay, that's H-O-B-E-R-M-A-N.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir.
And he's at the University of Texas, Austin. His book is about how the stereotypes and prejudices of black people, especially as natural-born athletes, basketball players, and all of that, has really contributed an immense amount of harm to non-white people.
September the 28th.
26th, I believe. I might be incorrect on that. I don't even think I put it in the blog talk yet, so it might.
Oh, well, man, I greatly appreciate that, man. I was hoping that you was going to do a show like that. I would definitely.
I try to get everybody that the people request. 720 requested that I get Dick Lair. As soon as I get through some of these programs, I'll make an effort to contact him, but I try to get the folks that people recommend. And he already agreed. And he seems very informed. I didn't even tell him Professor Dorothy Roberts' name. I just said I had a professor from Northwestern talking about black people being mistreated in the health industry. And he said, "Oh, was that Dorothy Roberts?" Very informed white person, and I think his book is fantastic. It's about 10 years old, but
you read it?
Exactly. Not yet. I've just read the previews and things of it, so I've got a lot of stuff to read.
So I'm assuming you're not going to buy it. You're going to the public library.
Yes, do not buy it. I have not bought one of the books of the people that have been on my program. The only people's books that I have bought have been Mr. Veely Fuller's book, Dr. Welsing's book, and Dr. Kenneth O'Reilly, but I had bought that a long time ago. Other than that, I do not buy the books of the people who are coming on my show. I go to the library and read the books there. Again, do not purchase these white people's books. I have a lot of respect for Dr. O'Reilly's work, Dr. Martin Kevorkian's book. Several of the white people who've been on, I think they've wrote tremendous stuff, but yeah, don't buy their stuff. Just go to the library. His book should be at the library, too. But yeah, that's coming up September 26th, and I believe it's at 6 p.m. But again, that's far enough off. I'll enter it, so I'll make sure you know. I'll shoot you an email, and
cool,
once I start reading it, I'll shoot you some of my thoughts, so you'll have an idea what I think about.
Yeah,
his book.
Matter of fact, as soon as I get off as soon as the program, I'm definitely going to the internet and look him up.
Oh yeah, he's got a lot of stuff. He sent me some material already. He sent me, I think he talked to the NAACP, and he sent me that, and he's also doing work on non-white people being mistreated in the health industry. And he sent me, I'm sorry?
No, because he went to Texas, the Texas Longhorns, right? Is that correct? Or
yes, sir. That's
okay.
It. He's a professor there. I don't know if he went to school there. He teaches
one of my
there.
favorite players that you went to that school. So.
Oh, who was it? Ricky Williams?
No.
Young?
Vince Young.
Oh, okay. Yeah. He will be here, and you should call into that show and ask some questions. I again want to plug, because we have a very full weekend here on the Cows. Tomorrow, Professor Ian Lopez, he is the author of White by Law. His book is all about what it means to be a white person in the system of white supremacy, and he looks at court cases where white supremacists have decided who is white and who is not white, and on what basis. That's what his whole book is about. He'll be here tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific. He'll be here Sunday. We have two shows. The first show is with Professor Vernelia Randall. She's a black female, and she wrote the book Dying While Black. It is about how the entire healthcare system functions to support the system of white supremacy and to keep non-white people, and especially black people, in horrible health. That's Sunday at 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific. The second show on Sunday is with John Delport. He is, I think, a white person. I'll make sure to ask. He was born in so-called South Africa, so he has experienced the system of white supremacy in so-called South Africa and in this area of the world, the United States. He will be here on Sunday evening at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. It has been reported to me that he thinks it would be constructive if non-white people discontinued having sexual intercourse with white people. I will for sure ask about that. Monday, do-over from last week, Cynthia McKinney. I talked to her yesterday. She will be here Monday morning, I guess afternoon if you're on the East Coast, 2 p.m. Monday afternoon, 11 a.m. Monday morning if you're on the West Coast. So again, it's 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific. That's Monday. Cynthia McKinney will be here. And Tuesday, last one out of the series, Friedrich Gooding and Khalid Patterson, they wrote a book called You Mean There's Race in My Movie. This book is all about racism in films, on and off the camera.
Are they non-white or white?
They are both non-white. I believe they are both black males.
Okay.
Dr. Moore actually gave me this book when I went to see him. I flipped it open to a random page, and they had an incident where Jamie Foxx, when he was on the set for Miami Vice, he kept finding nooses on the set, and he complained about this, and it continued to happen. And Mr. Patterson, Mr. Gooding, they contacted the studio, and they confirmed that this did happen, but they didn't want to go into any further detail about it. Incidents like this, and they basically do film reviews that break down the racism in films. That's Mr. Patterson and Mr. Gooding. That's what their book is about, and they will be here Tuesday evening, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. So we have, this is the first of 6 shows in the next 5 days. So if you enjoy the cows, you should have a blast over the next few days. Subscribe, favorite the program, call in. Me and Justice will be hanging out. Justice, outstanding job today asking questions. Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. How did you feel about today's show?
I felt that it was a great show, and I know that I had some more questions for Dr. McIntosh.
You had some more questions?
Yeah, for Dr. McIntosh. And then
you want to?
And then I suspect that she was practicing racism through most of the show.
Why did you think that?
Because she wasn't giving, like when I asked this question, about were the 2 men white, and then she kept talking about some other stuff. But all I needed to know, because I asked her about 4 times, and then she would not give me the answer. And so finally she gave me the answer. She said they were both non-white. And then for you, he was not giving the right answer. She wouldn't really explain white privilege and white supremacy together. And I didn't really agree with white privilege. I didn't really understand it much. I never ever heard of white privilege in my life before. So don't really know. And then I was gonna talk about this book. Do you mind if I share it?
Sure.
Okay. When I was at the library yesterday to go get some books and some movies, I found this book, and the book was called 100 People Screwing Up America. And it showed 2 non-white males on there, and one was Michael Jackson, which I don't suppose he was screwing up America, so-called America, and I don't know what the other non-white male is, but I looked at the cover, and there was more white people on the cover and only 2 non-white males on the cover. So what I thought about that book was that the book was maybe going to be about not telling the truth about white supremacy and doing something that was not constructive to producing justice. So that is what I thought about the book.
Have you started reading this book yet?
No, I just checked it out. It's not here, but it's still at the library. So I just checked it out for a moment, and then I put it right back in the slot.
Okay. I see. I would be interested in checking that out because I don't think, he passed now. I'm sorry?
What's the name of the book again?
Yes, sir.
What's the name?
100 People Screwing Up America. That's what the book's called.
100 People
Screwing Up America.
Screwing Up America. Okay. I can Google that.
I don't think Michael Jackson was, when he was alive, I don't think he was screwing up much of anything. I think he, more than anything, was a victim of white supremacy, and he was heavily mistreated, what they say, screwed up by white people who practice racism, white supremacy, in my view. I would like to see this book, though, to see what people they think are, quote-unquote, screwing things up. I know, well, I have to prepare. I'm sorry?
Oh, I was going to say, next time when I go to the library, I'll check it out, and then I can maybe send a picture of the cover and some pages for anybody else who wants to read some of the pages and look at the cover and see what they think about what's going to happen.
For sure. I tell you what, I will take a few minutes to see if I can locate the author, and maybe we can get them to come on the show. We've had a lot of people who've written books come on the show, so maybe we can get him to, or her, to come on the show, and you can ask them.
Hello?
Yes, sir.
I said we don't want you to be sexist.
Yeah. Since we have a system of male patriarchy, as the good Dr. McIntosh said, I don't want that. And again, I want to emphasize, I totally understand. There are lots of females who are mistreated on the basis of gender. I never said that's not true, but what I have said, by far, the biggest problem on the planet is the system of white supremacy, and that should be replaced with a system of justice where no one is mistreated for any reason, and the people who need help get the help they need. That's what I've always said. This program is about replacing white supremacy with justice, not about people being mistreated because they wear glasses, not about people being mistreated because they're female, or any other forms of abuse, because I have concluded the greatest form of abuse by far is racism, white supremacy, and the mistreatment of people who are classified as non-white, and Dr. McIntosh was very aware of that before she came on the program.
And then,
at any rate.
Huh?
Yes, ma'am, I'm listening.
Okay. And what I was going to say to her, because she was talking about, like, white privilege has been going around, and I was going to say that I had never heard of white privilege, and you are telling me that white privilege has been going around. And, I mean, I really never heard of it. But I've heard of white supremacy and racism, which mean the same thing.
Yeah. I have heard people use the term white privilege. I suspect that when white people do that, it's because that is much more comfortable. It doesn't sound as bad, and it certainly doesn't have the negative feelings that go along with saying white supremacy. That tends to make white people feel defensive, tends to make them feel like they are at fault for something, which they may be. They, I think, just are much more comfortable using the term white privilege because that is not the most accurate term to describe what's going on. Again, Jessica Pettit talked about in her article, white people do things like that, practicing white supremacy consciously and or unconsciously. When they talk about racism, white supremacy, they will not use the best terms. They will use terms that make them feel safe, that do not attack and accurately call out the system of white supremacy. So I feel she was doing exactly that, and she contradicted her own work. It's in her own article where she says being more willing to use the terms white supremacy in black and white, page 6 of the article titled White Privilege, An Account to Spend. And this is recent. This is not something she wrote 20 years ago. This came out this year. So whatever. Those are my thoughts. For Jessica Pettit, the admitted white supremacist, this was one of your all-star white people, alleged anti-racist. I do not think she made foolishness of my logic. I think she completely ducked questions and did not answer questions. You, her, Tim Wise, anybody else that is a white person, alleged anti-racist, please come to the cows and show me where I'm incorrect, because I don't want to be saying anything that's wrong. If you think you can throw my logic in the trash, please come do it, because I could be incorrect. And if you can express the system of white supremacy better than I can, I'll stop saying what I'm saying and I'll say the way you say it. But that didn't happen today. I welcome any white person. Please come to the cows and show me where I'm incorrect, and Justice as well, because she did a phenomenal job today. I'm going to prep for tomorrow's show.
I have one more question before you go.
Shoot, sir.
Back to what you were saying again. It to me, it would be a very, very. If I don't know how constructive this is, but I would love to have Dr. Wilson and Neely Jr. Fuller on the cows with some of these people who are alleged counter activists against white supremacy, and then let's see. I mean, because to me, I just would like to see that. Then you can smash all the terminology and all the miscues as far as languages and seeing things. Hello?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I mean,
I agree.
That's how I see it. I mean, I'm looking at it as saying, okay, how good is your stuff, and why do you, every time you get on the cows, you always misquote your stuff? Like, what are you afraid of? You white.
I agree. I know the first time when Tim Wise was on the cows in June, I did ask if Dr. Wellesley, if she would be willing to come on with him, and she said that the tendency is, and I've seen this, I have experienced exactly what she said, that when a non-white person, especially a black person, attacks and is aggressive in how they question and respond to a white person who alleges to be anti-racist, often the non-white person is portrayed as the villain. Even non-white people get upset about if it's a non-white person who's aggressively questioning a white person. I have experienced this on the cows and in in-person conversations that I've had about racism, white supremacy, and I've seen it happen to other people where they have been attacked because they've aggressively questioned a white person. So I totally understand why she didn't want to do it, because she didn't think it would be constructive. But and next time I talk to her, I'm going to let her know that I think at least this program, non-white people would not attack her, and they would be very interested in seeing that conversation happen, that some of that tendency of non-white people to protect white people is eroding, at least here on the cows. So I will see if we can make it happen. Tim Wise is not exactly my best friend, so I don't know, he might not be willing to come back on the show again. But hey, there are a lot of white people who are alleged to be anti-racist, so maybe we can get Dr. Wellesley with Molly Shakur.
Yeah, that definitely wanted, because she said she went to Fisk and learned under them. So
yeah, or Farrell Winfrey, or I don't know, maybe even Jessica Pettit. She's not exactly my pal at this point either, but yeah, I would love to get Yeah, I would love to see that happen. I don't know if Neely Fuller would be interested in doing that. I think he's been on panels with Tim Wise before, and I don't know if he would be
is any of that stuff that with Tim Wise and Neely Fuller, is that on YouTube or anything I can get my hands on?
I haven't seen it. I have just, I believe I have heard him talk about it.
Is any radio or a CD or anything I can get my hands on with that? I would love to hear that.
I didn't hear them talking to each other. I just heard Mr. Fuller say that he was on a program about racism, white supremacy, and I mean, just there was a presentation where people, I don't know if it was videotaped or recorded, but Tim Wise was there. He was there. He said he did not say anything to Mr. Wise. His response was that if Mr. Wise is doing effective work against racism, he'll know it as a non-white person. So okay. I don't know if they, had any sort of heated discussion or anything. I suspect that wasn't the case, but yeah, if I can make it happen, I will do my darndest, see if I can pull it off. Again, I think this program, the tendency for non-white people to, attack a non-white person who is aggressively going after a white person in a discussion of white supremacy, I think that tendency is eroding here. So I'll see if I can make it happen. If I can, I will make sure I let you know.
Thank you so much, sir.
No problem. No problem. Thank you for tuning in to the program. Hello? Yes, ma'am.
Just before we go. Hello?
Yes, ma'am. We can hear you.
Oh, okay. Just before we go, I wanted to share my definition of justice.
Let's hear it.
Okay. To me, justice means no confusion, and whoever needs help gets the most help, no matter what color they are.
Outstanding. No confusion. Man, I would love to be in an environment where there was no confusion. We will get there. That's the effort. We will get there. I do not agree with Dr. McIntosh that we won't see it. That's what she says. She doesn't think she'll see it. I'm working to see it as soon as possible so that we can end the cows, I can retire from the show, and me and Justice can go do more fun things with our free time. We can go to American Lake and get on the boat and paddle around and act silly. At any rate, we'll be back tomorrow, 1 o'clock p.m. Pacific, 4 o'clock p.m. Eastern. Justice and Gus T Renegade, the Cows, Context of White Supremacy, will be here with Professor Ian Lopez. I hope everybody can tune into the program if you think it will be constructive. If not, please find something more constructive to do with your time. Justice and Gus signing off. I'll give you the last word. Do you have anything you want to say before we go?
It was a really great show, and I'll see if I can meet you up in the chat room.
Okay. I'll go to the chat room then. Right on. Look out for Justice and Gus in the chat room. Thank you, everyone, for tuning into the program. We hope to see you tomorrow, August 29th. Justice and Gus signing off from the Cows. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.